Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week 19 of your SAT math prep. This week's topic is a somewhat difficult topic for students all the way through high school, and that is the idea of a literal equation. Um, Essentially, what a literal equation is where we use our algebra skills to solve an equation that has more than one variable for a specific variable. So this is going to be a challenge here. We need to make sure we pay close attention during the guided notes because most of us have not had a ton of this in class so far. And as a result, we need to be paying close attention to the overall process. Make sure you write down everything that we talk about in the video. Again, I shouldn't need to say it by now, but make sure your name is clearly written on your notes and eventually under skill check, and that you have circled your teacher name and class name. So here we go. Example 1 says the power, P, produced by a machine is represented by the equation shown below, where W is the work performed during an amount of time T. Which of the following correctly expresses W in terms of P and T? So what we have to do is we have to take this equation, P equals W over T, and we have to solve for W. So if we look at that equation right now, we have P equals W divided by T. We need to ask ourselves, if we want to get W by itself, what operation do we need to carry out to get rid of the T? Well, right now that equation says P equals W divided by T, which means that to get rid of T, we need to do the opposite of division, which would be multiplication. We would multiply that side by T. Whatever we do to the right side of the equation, we also have to do to the left side of the equation, which means that this equation could be written as W equals P times T, which would be answer A. So this is a very important skill to higher mathematics, because if you could solve an equation for a specific variable, then you don't need additional equations to solve other problems for that variable. Example 2 is a little bit harder. It says the speed of sound in dry air, V, can be modeled by the formula V equals 331.3 plus 0.606 T, where T is the temperature in degrees Celsius and V is measured in meters per second. Which of the following correctly expresses T in terms of V? So again, that tells us what we're supposed to solve for, okay? We are supposed to solve for T. So we bring that equation down here, V equals 331.3 plus 0.606 T. If we are trying to get T by itself, then we first need to remove all other terms that are not T terms from that side of the equation. So our first step would be to move the 331.3. Since that is a positive value, we can move it to the other side of the equation by subtracting 331.3 from each side of the equation. That would give us V minus 331.3 equals 0.606 T. Now again, our goal is to get T by itself. So what we do is we need to divide both sides of the equation by 0.606. That would give us the equation T equals V minus 331.3 divided by 0.606. That would be the same equation solved for T. So our equation should be D. T equals V minus 331.3 divided by 0.606. And that's the overall basic approach. The problem is going to give you an equation that has multiple variables, and then they're going to ask you to express that equation in terms of a specific variable. So let's do a couple more. There's the first two up on the board. Let's get a couple more in place here. Okay, example 3 says the formula below is often used by project managers to compute E, the estimated time to complete a job, where O is the shortest possible completion time, P, and O is the shortest completion time, P is the longest possible completion time, and M is the most likely completion time. Which of the following correctly gives P in terms of E, O, and M? So again, it comes down to, they told us what to solve for right there in the problem. They said we need to solve for P. So, to solve for P, we need to keep in mind that the first thing we need to do is get rid of the fraction, which means we need to multiply both sides of the equation by 6. So that would give us 6E equals O plus 4M plus P. Then if we want P by itself, we will need to move both the O and the 4M to the other side of the equation. So we would subtract O and subtract 4M, which means we would have P equals 6E minus O minus 4M, which would be A. Now, these problems come in varying levels of difficulty, and those of you that are in pre-AP will see some of the harder ones on the back side of your skill check. But again, it's always the same process. We have the algebra skills necessary to solve equations. We just have to have enough trust in our skill set, and we have to think to ourselves, well, if I want to undo this operation, what is its inverse? And remember that the inverse of addition is subtraction. The inverse of multiplication is division. Here in example 4, we need to come up with an inverse for a squared. It says the formula S equals 4 pi r squared gives the surface area, S, of a sphere in terms of the length of its radius, r. Which of the following gives the radius of the sphere in terms of the surface area? So that is saying solve for the radius. Solve for r. Okay? We need to solve that equation for r. So we have S equals 4 pi r squared. So the first thing we need to do is get r squared by itself, which we would get by dividing each side by 4 and by pi. That would give us r squared is equal to S over 4 pi. Then we have to ask ourselves, if I want to undo squared, what operation do I need to carry out? Well, to undo squared, we take a square root, because roots and exponents are opposites. And in this case, squared, the opposite of squared is square root. So when we do that, we get r equals the square root of S divided by 4 pi. R is the square root of the surface area divided by 4 pi. And that does it for our examples. Now at this point, your proctor is going to pass out the skill check. You should very easily be able to complete the front side of the skill check, and for many of you, the only side of the skill check, in the remaining time. If you have the back side as well, those questions are a little bit more challenging. You may not make it through all of those, but do the best that you can. And remember that you're going to be turning your skill check into your proctor, so make sure your name is clearly written on the skill check so that you can turn it in at the end of the period. Thank you very much for your time and attention.